The slap echoed through the first-class cabin. For a moment everything froze. Passengers stared, the air felt heavy, and the woman sitting in the aisle seat slowly lifted a hand to her cheek. The flight attendant standing above her still looked angry, as if she had every right to do what she just did. But she didn't know. She had just slapped a high-powered lawyer. And what she didn't realize? The lawyer's husband owns the entire airline. Everything was about to change. And it wouldn't end well for her. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Naima adjusted her blazer as she settled into her first-class seat, placing her briefcase neatly beside her. It had been a long, exhausting week, and all she wanted was a quiet flight home. The soft leather seat, the muted conversations, and the distant sound of passengers boarding behind her should have felt relaxing, but something about this flight already felt different. She had noticed it the moment she stepped onto the plane. The way the flight attendant's eyes lingered on her a little too long, the way her expression shifted from professional to something colder. Naima had experienced this before. The silent questioning, the subtle looks that suggested she didn't quite belong. But she was used to it. She had worked too hard to let something so small shake her. She pulled out her phone, checking her messages one last time before takeoff. A text from her husband, Idris, sat at the top of her screen. "Safe travels. Call me when you land." She smiled slightly, typing back a quick reply. "Boarded. See you soon." Just as she slipped her phone back into her bag, a shadow loomed over her. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant said, voice clipped and firm. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Naima looked up, meeting the woman's narrowed gaze. The question threw her off for a moment. Slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out her boarding pass, handing it over without a word. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Lisa Caldwell, snatched the ticket and scanned it. Her lips pursed, her grip tightening slightly around the paper. "This is a first-class ticket," Lisa said, her tone slower this time, as if waiting for an explanation. Naima kept her face neutral. "Yes, it is." Lisa hesitated, her eyes flickering around the cabin. The businessman seated across from Naima, an older man with silver hair and a crisp navy suit, glanced up briefly before returning to his laptop. A young couple a few rows ahead whispered to each other, oblivious to what was happening. No one else seemed to notice or care. Lisa shifted slightly. "Are you traveling alone?" Naima tilted her head, studying the woman for a moment. The question was unnecessary. She had never seen anyone else ask that before. "Yes." The silence stretched between them. Lisa's jaw tightened, and for a second it seemed like she wanted to say something else. But instead, she exhaled sharply and handed the boarding pass back. "All right then," she muttered before turning and walking away. Naima tucked the ticket into her bag, keeping her expression unreadable. She had faced worse than this. A quiet dismissal? A subtle challenge to her presence? It wasn't new, but it didn't mean she had to ignore it. A few minutes passed. The flight attendants moved through the first-class cabin, offering drinks and warm towels. Naima kept to herself, waiting patiently, but her eyes followed Lisa as she served the other passengers. Lisa reached the businessman first, her smile warm as she offered him a glass of champagne. "Here you go, sir. Enjoy." She moved down the row, handing fresh orange juice to the young couple ahead, chatting with them briefly before continuing. Then she stopped at Naima's seat. The warmth disappeared. The polite smile vanished. "Would you like anything to drink?" Lisa asked, her tone flat. Naima met her gaze, her voice calm. "Water, please." Lisa didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her request. She simply turned on her heel and walked away. Naima's fingers tapped against the armrest as she watched Lisa continue down the aisle, offering friendly service to everyone else. It was a small thing, just a drink. But the message behind it was loud. Naima exhaled slowly, keeping her expression calm as she watched Lisa walk away. The tension in her shoulders was subtle, but it was there. She had faced people like this before, the ones who didn't say anything outright but made sure their actions spoke volumes. She leaned back in her seat, waiting. Minutes passed. The businessman across the aisle had already been served his second glass of champagne. The young couple ahead had been offered snacks to go with their drinks. But her water? Nowhere in sight. She pressed the call button. A few seconds later, Lisa reappeared, her face carefully blank. "Yes?" "I asked for water," Naima said simply. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. "We're still getting everything sorted." Naima's eyes flicked to the tray Lisa was carrying. It was nearly empty, just a few glasses left. "You seem to have everything for everyone else," Naima replied, keeping her voice even. Lisa's expression barely shifted, but the annoyance in her eyes was clear. "I'll get it when I can." Without another word, she turned and walked away again. Naima didn't react. She had spent years in courtrooms dealing with people who thought their power allowed them to be untouchable. She knew how to pick her battles, but she also knew when someone was challenging her on purpose. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement. The businessman across from her had paused his typing. His eyes flicked between her and Lisa, as if debating whether to say something. But after a moment, he looked back at his laptop and kept typing. A voice cut through the silence. "That was weird," someone murmured. Naima turned her head slightly. The young woman from the couple ahead had spoken, her brows slightly furrowed. Her partner, a man with short curls and a leather jacket, shifted uncomfortably. "I saw that too," he muttered. "She just ignored you." Naima gave a small, polite nod but didn't say anything. She wasn't going to play into the moment, not yet. Just then, another flight attendant appeared, a younger woman with a bright professional smile. Her name tag read Elena. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry about the delay," Elena said, placing a bottle of cold water on Naima's tray table. "Here you go." "Thank you, Elena," Naima said, making sure to say her name clearly. Elena gave her a quick nod before walking off, her expression unreadable. Lisa was nowhere to be seen. Naima unscrewed the cap of the bottle, taking a slow sip. She could feel eyes on her, quiet curiosity mixed with silent avoidance. The couple ahead had noticed. Even the businessman, though he tried to pretend otherwise, had noticed. Lisa thought she could get away with it. That was her first mistake. Naima stayed composed, sipping her water as the quiet tension in the first-class cabin settled. She had no intention of making a scene. Not yet. Instead, she observed. Lisa returned minutes later, her expression unchanged, carrying a tray of meal options. She moved through the aisle with the same careful politeness she had shown before, warm smiles, light conversation, making sure every passenger felt accommodated. But when she reached Naima's seat, there was another pause, just long enough to be intentional. "We have 2 options for dinner," Lisa said, her voice clipped. "Grilled salmon with vegetables or pasta with creamy sauce." Naima looked at her evenly. "I'll have the salmon." Lisa's fingers twitched around the tray. "We're out of salmon." Naima's eyes didn't leave hers. The man across the aisle, who had ordered after her, was currently cutting into his serving of salmon, steam still rising from his plate. The young woman in the row ahead whispered something to her partner again. Naima let the silence stretch before responding. "Then I'll have the pasta." Lisa dropped the plate in front of her with just a little too much force. The silverware rattled against the tray table. "Enjoy," Lisa muttered, already turning away before Naima could respond. Naima inhaled deeply, rolling her shoulders back. The message had been sent loud and clear. Lisa was pushing, trying to get a reaction, trying to remind Naima that she didn't belong here. Naima had seen this tactic before. People like Lisa always wanted the same thing, for her to become angry, to cause a scene, to raise her voice so that later they could say, "See, I told you she was difficult." She wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, Naima picked up her fork and twirled it through the pasta, taking a slow bite. Then, without breaking eye contact, she reached for her phone and sent a single message. "Flight 208, first class. You might want to handle something." She set the phone down beside her plate. Lisa had made a mistake. She thought she was in control. She had no idea what was coming next. Naima continued eating, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She wanted Lisa to think nothing had changed. But something had. The message had been sent. Across the aisle, the businessman shifted in his seat, clearly aware of what had just happened. His eyes flickered toward Naima, then back to his laptop. He wasn't going to intervene. He was the type to stay neutral, to avoid getting involved. The young couple ahead, however, kept glancing back. The woman, whose name Naima had overheard was Celine, seemed on the verge of saying something. Her partner, Dayan, placed a hand on her arm, murmuring something too low to hear. Naima let them talk. They weren't her concern. Her concern was Lisa, who had vanished again. Naima leaned back, crossing one leg over the other as she checked her phone. No reply from Idris yet. She wasn't worried. He was a man of precision. When he moved, it wasn't rushed, it was calculated. A slow sip of water, another glance at the businessman, still pretending to be focused on work. Then, movement. Lisa reappeared, her posture still stiff with authority, but there was something else now. Uncertainty. She walked through the first-class cabin, straightening trays, refilling drinks, but her eyes flicked toward Naima's seat more than once. She felt it. Something was off. Naima didn't react. She simply waited. It wasn't long before the intercom crackled to life. "Ms. Caldwell, please report to the cockpit immediately." Lisa stopped mid-step. The shift in the air was immediate. A few passengers looked up, eyebrows raised. The businessman's fingers hesitated over his keyboard. Naima set her fork down, her expression unreadable. Lisa turned sharply, forcing herself to move with confidence. But there was a stiffness in her steps as she disappeared behind the curtain leading to the front of the plane. Celine whispered something to Dion again. He didn't stop her this time. She turned in her seat slightly, looking directly at Naima. "Did you do that?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. Naima reached for her water, took a small sip, and met Celine's gaze with a knowing look. "I don't make unnecessary noise," she said calmly. "But I do make things happen." Celine blinked. Dion let out a low chuckle. And Lisa? Lisa was about to learn exactly who she had just played with. Lisa stepped behind the curtain, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure why she had been called, but something about the tone of the announcement unsettled her. The cockpit was not where flight attendants were usually summoned, unless something serious was happening. She pushed through the door to the galley, where the co-pilot stood with his arms crossed. Next to him, a voice crackled over the in-flight phone. Lisa recognized the man on the other end instantly. Elliot Hayes, the airline's ground operations supervisor. He was the kind of man who didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Ms. Caldwell," Elliot's voice was firm, emotionless. "We received a report about an incident in first class." Lisa's throat went dry. "Incident," she repeated, trying to sound composed. Elliot sighed through the speaker. "A first-class passenger has reported being mistreated. I assume you know who I'm talking about." Lisa's fingers curled into fists. She did know. And now, she knew exactly where that text message had gone. Lisa swallowed, forcing a professional tone. "Mr. Hayes, I was simply following protocol. If a passenger—" "Don't waste my time," Elliot cut in. "The passenger in question is Naima Sinclair. Do you know who she is?" Lisa frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. "She's an attorney," Elliot continued. "A very well-known one, but more importantly, she is the wife of Idris Sinclair." The words hit Lisa like a slap to the face. Her blood ran cold. Idris Sinclair, owner of the airline. The realization made her stomach lurch. The woman she had been dismissing, disrespecting, and ignoring, the woman she had intentionally denied proper service, was married to the most powerful man in the company. Lisa felt the weight of her mistake settle in. "Ms. Caldwell," Elliot continued, his tone sharpening, "you will return to first class and ensure that Mrs. Sinclair receives the same level of service as every other passenger. You will apologize." and you will do so now." Lisa's lips parted, but no words came out. "Additionally," Elliot added, his voice turning colder, "upon landing you will report to the airline's executive office for a formal review of your conduct." Lisa's breath came faster. She felt the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. "Am I clear?" Lisa forced her voice to stay even. "Yes, sir." "Good," Elliot said. "Then fix your mistake." The line went dead. Lisa stood frozen in place. Fix her mistake? How could she fix something like this? She had just humiliated the wife of the man who owned the sky she was flying in, and now she had to walk back to first class and face her. Lisa took a deep breath, pressing her palms against the counter in the galley. Her hands were clammy, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had spent years controlling the first-class cabin, ensuring everything ran the way she wanted. Now, she was about to step back out there, not as the one in charge, but as the one who had lost control. She smoothed her uniform, squared her shoulders, and walked back through the curtain. The first-class cabin was quieter than before. Passengers weren't talking as much. They had noticed the announcement, noticed the way Lisa had been called away, and now, as she stepped back into the aisle, they were watching. Naima was still seated, perfectly composed, stirring the ice in her water with a slow, deliberate movement. Her posture hadn't changed. She hadn't fidgeted. She hadn't turned around to see where Lisa had gone. She had simply waited. Lisa swallowed hard and walked toward her. The businessman across the aisle glanced up briefly before pretending to focus on his laptop again. The young couple ahead, Celine and Dayon, weren't even pretending not to pay attention anymore. Lisa stopped at Naima's seat, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said, keeping her tone as neutral as possible. "I want to apologize for earlier. There was a misunderstanding." Naima slowly looked up at her. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice soft. Lisa nodded stiffly. "Yes, You checked my ticket," Naima said, her voice calm, measured. "You knew I was in the right seat. You ignored my request for water despite serving every other passenger. You told me the salmon was unavailable, yet I watched you serve it to the man sitting next to me." Lisa's throat went dry. "That doesn't sound like a misunderstanding," Naima continued. "That sounds like a choice." The air in the cabin felt heavier. The businessman stopped typing. Celine's mouth parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe Naima had just said it out loud. Lisa forced a tight smile. "Mrs. Sinclair, If you're going to apologize," Naima interrupted, tilting her head slightly, "at least have the courage to tell the truth." Lisa's fingers twitched. She could feel the eyes on her now. The control she had always wielded over the cabin was gone. Naima let the silence stretch between them. Lisa wasn't used to being powerless, and now she had no choice but to stand there, exposed with every passenger waiting to see what she would say next. The flight attendant inhaled sharply. "I misjudged you," Lisa admitted, forcing the words out. Naima gave a slow, knowing nod. "You did." Lisa wanted to disappear. Instead, she swallowed her pride and asked, "Can I get you anything else, Mrs. Sinclair?" Naima didn't blink. "You didn't ask me that before." Lisa knew what she was referring to. Earlier, she had served everyone with warmth and a smile, except her. Lisa clenched her jaw. "Would you like anything to drink?" she repeated, voice tighter this time. Naima picked up her half-empty water bottle, turning it slightly in her hands. "No," she said finally, her voice light but firm. "I think I'll stick with what I already have." Lisa nodded stiffly and turned to walk away, her face burning. As she retreated toward the galley, she could feel the shift in the cabin. The whispers, the lingering stares, the realization from every single passenger that something deeper had just unfolded right in front of them. Lisa didn't just lose control of the situation. She had lost something bigger, and she had no way of getting it back. Lisa moved quickly through the aisle, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had worked in first class for years, had built a reputation for being strict, efficient, and in control. But now she felt like every passenger's eyes were drilling into her back. She stepped behind the curtain into the galley, gripping the counter to steady herself. The space suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. Her breath came shallow and her hands trembled slightly. She had apologized. She had been forced to apologize, and yet it wasn't over. A voice cut through her thoughts. That didn't go well, did it? Lisa spun around. Elena, the younger flight attendant, leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed. Her tone wasn't mocking, just observant, almost amused. Lisa narrowed her eyes. Mind your own business. Elena shrugged. Kind of hard when the whole first-class cabin just watched you get put in your place. Lisa's jaw clenched. I don't need your commentary. Elena smirked, pushing off the counter. Sure, but you do need to start thinking about what's waiting for you when we land. Lisa stiffened. What are you talking about? Elena raised an eyebrow. Oh, you really don't know? She pulled out her tablet, tapping the screen. Flight records are monitored in real time. When a high-profile passenger files a complaint, especially someone like Mrs. Sinclair, it doesn't just disappear into a report. Lisa's stomach twisted. Elena tapped again, then turned the screen slightly toward Lisa. Corporate is already watching this flight, she said, which means whatever happens next, you won't get to control it. Lisa barely breathed as she stared at the screen. A formal report had already been flagged under her employee profile. A pending disciplinary review was now attached to her name. She had known she would be questioned after landing. She hadn't realized it had already escalated this far. Lisa exhaled sharply, snatching a napkin from the counter and dabbing at her forehead. It's just a report, she muttered, trying to steady herself. Elena let out a soft laugh. You keep telling yourself that. Lisa turned away, pressing her fingers against her temple. She had worked for this airline for 10 years. She had handled difficult passengers before, but never had she been in a position where she felt so exposed. And the worst part? Naima wasn't even trying. She hadn't yelled, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't demanded anything. She had simply let the weight of Lisa's own actions crash down on her. Lisa inhaled deeply, straightening her uniform again. Maybe she could fix this. Maybe she could smooth it over. She just needed to get through the rest of the flight, handle the landing, and then... The in-flight phone buzzed sharply. Lisa's heart stopped. Elena leaned in slightly, glancing at the flashing light. You should answer that, she murmured, a knowing look in her eyes. Lisa reached for the receiver with stiff fingers and slowly lifted it to her ear. This is Dominic Harper, Vice President of Operations. Ms. Caldwell, upon landing, you will be escorted to the corporate office for an immediate review. Lisa froze. Her mouth went dry. Do not speak to any passengers. Do not leave the aircraft without supervision. And do not, under any circumstances, attempt to cover up what has already been reported. Lisa gripped the receiver so tightly her knuckles turned white. Am I clear? The voice on the other end asked. Lisa's stomach twisted into knots. Yes, sir, she forced out. The line clicked dead. Lisa set the phone down slowly, her breathing shallow. Elena shook her head, letting out a low whistle. Wow, she murmured. That sounded serious. Lisa didn't answer. She already knew how serious it was. She had been trying to remind Naima Sinclair that she didn't belong. But now, Lisa was the one who didn't belong. Lisa gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. An immediate review upon landing? That wasn't protocol for a standard complaint. This was something else. This was bigger. She needed to think, fast. Taking a slow breath, she adjusted her posture, forcing herself to stand straight. She had been here before. Not in this exact position, but in situations where she had to regain control, redirect the outcome, and smooth things over before they spiraled. She could still fix this. Elena was still standing there, arms crossed, watching her with a look of silent amusement. Lisa hated it. The girl was enjoying this, waiting to see her fall, Lisa swallowed her frustration and turned, stepping back through the curtain into the first-class cabin. The atmosphere felt different now. Everything looked the same: the soft lighting, the quiet hum of conversation, the sound of silverware clinking against plates. But there was something off. She could feel it in the way the businessman across from Naima refused to look up from his laptop, even though Lisa knew he had seen everything. In the way the young couple a few rows ahead had stopped whispering, now just watching. But most of all, she could feel it in the way Naima hadn't moved at all. She sat in the same relaxed, composed posture, her expression unreadable. She wasn't smirking, wasn't smug, she wasn't even angry. She was just waiting. Lisa clenched her jaw, forcing a polite expression onto her face as she made her way down the aisle. She needed to act normal, pretend nothing had changed. She approached a passenger in the row ahead of Naima, forcing her usual professionalism. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked smoothly. The man, a middle-aged traveler in a charcoal suit, hesitated. His gaze flicked toward Naima's seat before he cleared his throat. "No, I'm fine," he said, his voice unusually cautious. Lisa nodded, turning slightly toward Selene and Dayon. "Anything for you two?" Selene tilted her head. "You're asking now?" she said, her voice light but laced with something sharper underneath. Lisa felt heat rise to her neck. "It's my job to check on passengers." Dayon smirked slightly. "Huh," he muttered. "Didn't seem like that earlier." Lisa's stomach twisted. She shouldn't have looked at Naima just then, but she did. And that was the mistake. Naima didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes met Lisa's, calm, steady. Waiting. Waiting for what? Lisa didn't know. Lisa tore her gaze away and turned sharply, moving toward the front of the cabin before she lost her composure. The plane was starting its descent. The captain's voice came over the intercom, reminding passengers to prepare for landing. Lisa had never been more desperate to get off a flight in her entire career. She returned to the galley, pressing her back against the counter, hands gripping the cool surface. Elena was still there. Lisa could feel the younger flight attendant's eyes on her, waiting too. "You know," Elena said after a moment, "I bet Mrs. Sinclair doesn't even need to say anything." Lisa didn't respond. "She's not making demands. She's not yelling," Elena continued, tilting her head thoughtfully. "She's just sitting there, letting you crash yourself." Lisa's nails dug into the counter. Elena leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "And that's worse, isn't it?" Lisa's stomach churned, her throat dry, because she knew it was true. She had always been the one in control, the one who decided how things ran, who got what treatment, who was taken seriously and who wasn't. And now she wasn't just losing control, she had already lost it, and there was nothing she could do to take it back. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Lisa inhaled sharply. The descent had begun, and with it, the real fall was just getting started. The plane began its steady descent, and Lisa gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the galley wall as if it could offer her an escape. She needed to think, to fix this before they landed. This wasn't just a bad interaction with a passenger. This wasn't a minor complaint she could brush off or talk her way out of. This was a direct problem with the wife of the most powerful man in the airline, and Lisa had made it personal. Her hands clenched. She had worked too hard for this, spent too many years climbing through the ranks, making sure first class ran exactly the way she wanted it to. She wasn't about to lose everything over one passenger. Lisa took a slow breath, steeling herself before stepping back into the first-class cabin. The mood had shifted even more. The descent had made the passengers quieter, but there was something else, too, a thick tension that still hung in the air. Lisa knew why. Everyone was waiting to see what happened when they landed. She couldn't let things get worse. Squaring her shoulders, she walked back toward Naima's seat, trying to keep her expression neutral. She wasn't sure if she was going to fix anything, but she had to try. Naima was exactly as she had been before, calm, still, unshaken. The ice in her glass had melted, condensation pooling at the base, but she hadn't touched it. Lisa stopped beside her, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Sinclair," she began, keeping her tone carefully controlled. "Is there anything else I can do for you before we land?" Naima looked up at her, blinking slowly, as if amused by the sudden change in demeanor. Lisa felt the weight of the moment. If Naima made one complaint, just one more statement, it would be over. Naima tilted her head slightly. "You've already done enough." The response wasn't harsh. It wasn't aggressive. It was just factual. And that was worse. Lisa swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "I just want to make sure you have everything you need." Naima let out a slow breath, and Lisa knew she was deciding whether or not to say something. A small pause. Then Naima spoke. "You've already made your choices," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I think it's time you deal with them." Lisa's pulse spiked. Naima's lack of reaction was the reaction. She wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't calling for the captain. She was letting Lisa's own mistakes take care of everything. Lisa inhaled sharply and stepped away. She needed to keep moving, to act like everything was fine. But it wasn't. The businessman across the aisle finally spoke. "You might want to take a seat," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Landing soon." Lisa turned toward the front of the plane, her movements stiff. Passengers were fastening their seatbelts, preparing for touchdown. The same routine she had seen thousands of times. But this time, she was on the other side. Lisa moved toward the galley again, pressing her hands against the cool surface of the counter. Her mind raced. Would she be fired? Would they suspend her? Maybe she could spin it. Maybe she could argue that she was just following protocol, but even she knew that wouldn't work. This wasn't about protocol. This was about who she had chosen to challenge. And Naima Sinclair. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed to fight. She had simply let Lisa destroy herself. The intercom crackled. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Lisa forced herself to breathe. The plane tilted slightly, descending toward the runway. She wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere left to go. The moment the wheels hit the ground, Lisa knew. Her career, her reputation, her entire future was about to crash. The plane touched down with a smooth but final impact, the tires skimming the runway before settling into their full weight. The familiar jolt that usually signaled the end of another successful flight felt different this time. For Lisa, it didn't mark the end of a shift. It marked the beginning of something much worse. She stood frozen in the galley, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Around her, the cabin filled with the sounds of landing. Seatbelts clicking open before the light even turned off. Passengers shifting, stretching, reaching for their belongings. Lisa's stomach twisted painfully. She knew what was waiting for her outside this aircraft. Security, corporate judgment, and worst of all, Idris Sinclair himself. The intercom crackled and the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is 4:32 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of our crew, we thank you for flying with us today." Lisa barely heard the words. The moment the plane slowed, her heart pounded so hard she thought she might pass out. She needed a way out. Could she talk to the captain? Could she explain before things got worse? Before she could move, the in-flight phone buzzed sharply. She flinched. Elena, standing a few feet away, raised an eyebrow. "Are you gonna answer that?" Lisa's fingers shook as she reached for the receiver. She pressed it to her ear, her voice barely steady. "This is Lisa Caldwell," a male voice responded. Cold, director, unforgiving. "This is Dominic Harper, Vice President of Operations. Ms. Caldwell, remain in the aircraft until instructed. Security will be boarding momentarily." Lisa's grip tightened around the phone. "Sir, I—" The line clicked dead. Elena let out a low whistle. Yikes. Lisa slowly lowered the receiver, her entire body numb. Security. They were sending security onto the plane, not waiting for her at the gate, not calling her in for a meeting. They were coming to get her. Passengers began standing, retrieving their luggage from the overhead compartments. The first-class cabin moved slower than economy, people taking their time, adjusting their coats, stretching their arms. But Lisa's attention zeroed in on Naima. She was still seated, relaxed, as if she had all the time in the world. She didn't rush to grab her things. She didn't fumble with her phone. She waited, because she knew. Lisa felt it. This wasn't just an inconvenience for her. This was designed to be humiliating, public. The realization sent a new wave of panic through her. She needed to move, to do something, but it was too late. The doors unlocked, and security stepped inside. A hush fell over the front rows. Lisa's breath hitched as she saw them, 2 uniformed security officers, tall, stern, here for her. One of them stepped forward, glancing down at a piece of paper. His gaze lifted, meeting Lisa's. "Ms. Caldwell," he said smoothly, "you'll need to come with us." A ripple of whispers spread through first class. The businessman looked up, frowning slightly. The young couple, Celine and Dayan, openly stared. Lisa felt her legs go weak. She forced a smile, trying to save face. "I don't understand," she said, even though she understood perfectly. "This is an internal matter," the officer continued. "We need you to step off the aircraft now." Passengers watched. Lisa swallowed hard. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening like this. She turned to Elena, as if hoping the younger flight attendant might say something, might help her somehow. But Elena just sighed. "Well," she murmured, "good luck with that." Lisa's hands curled into fists. She couldn't even tell if her face was red from anger, shame, or pure fear. A throat cleared. Lisa stiffened. She knew who it was before she even turned her head. Naima had finally stood up. She adjusted her blazer, slow and deliberate, before meeting Lisa's gaze. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, they were sharper than ever. Lisa tried to hold her ground, tried to stare back. But Naima just gave the slightest, smallest smile. A smile that said, "You did this to yourself." Lisa's stomach dropped. She turned back to security, swallowing hard. Her voice barely worked as she muttered, "Fine, let's go." The officer stepped aside, gesturing for her to move forward. Lisa took a single step, then another. The walk down the aisle had never felt so long. Passengers watched her, whispered. Some stared directly, while others avoided her gaze altogether. The businessman tapped at his keyboard like nothing was happening, but his jaw was tight. Celine shook her head slightly, whispering something to Dion. Lisa forced herself forward, one step at a time. She had walked through first class thousands of times, but this time, she was walking through as a disgraced employee. And Naima Sinclair? She was watching, the way Lisa had watched her. Step by step, Lisa felt the walls closing in. She stepped off the plane, and into a very different reality. The moment Lisa stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt the air shift around her. The walls, once just a neutral part of her routine, suddenly felt too narrow, too suffocating. Her feet felt heavier with every step, her body moving forward only because she had no other choice. The 2 security officers flanked her, their expressions unreadable. They weren't grabbing her, weren't treating her like a criminal, but their presence alone was enough. This wasn't a normal post-flight debrief. This was an escort, a forced removal, a public display of consequence. Passengers from economy began stepping off the plane behind her, some glancing curiously as they passed. Some whispered. A few even stole a second look, as if recognizing her from the tense atmosphere during the flight. Lisa's stomach twisted. She had always loved the airport, the feeling of control, the authority that came with walking through terminals in uniform, knowing she was one of the few who dictated how things ran. Now, she was walking through it like an outcast. As they moved closer to the terminal exit, Lisa spotted a group of airline executives waiting near the security station. 3 men and 1 woman, all in sharp business attire, their arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. Her review board. Lisa inhaled sharply. She wasn't ready. She needed time. Time to prepare a statement. Time to come up with a defense. But time had run out the moment she questioned Naima Sinclair's seat. One of the executives stepped forward. James Connors, director of flight operations. He had a reputation for being fair but ruthless, a man who valued precision, order, and the airline's public image above all else. Lisa had worked under him for years. He had even praised her once for how efficiently she managed first class. Now, his blue eyes held no warmth. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, his voice clipped. "Follow us." Lisa's throat tightened, but she nodded stiffly, stepping into pace with them. The walk to the executive lounge was brutal. Lisa felt every glance, every shift of the crowd as people noticed the uniformed officers escorting her. Some looked on with curiosity, others with disinterest, but a few seemed to recognize what was happening. She spotted one of the gate agents she had worked with before, Daniel, a young man who usually handled first-class check-ins. He met her gaze for half a second, then quickly looked away. Lisa clenched her jaw. She was already being erased. No one would defend her. No one would step forward, because no one wanted to risk standing against Idris Sinclair's company. They finally reached the executive lounge, a quiet, glass-walled room away from the public eye. Inside, a sleek conference table stretched across the center, with neatly arranged chairs and a single tablet blinking with Lisa's employee profile. She hesitated at the door. James Connors gestured for her to sit. "Have a seat, Ms. Caldwell." Lisa swallowed hard and stepped inside, her movements stiff. She could still turn this around. She just had to be careful. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, keeping her posture professional. James sat across from her, tapping the screen of the tablet. The others remained standing, their faces carefully neutral. A long silence, then James looked up. "Do you know why you're here?" Lisa wet her lips before answering. "There was a complaint." James's gaze didn't waver. "Not just a complaint. A formal incident report." Lisa forced herself to breathe evenly. "Mr. Connors, James turned the tablet toward her. The screen displayed her employee record. Next to it, a flagged incident report from Flight 208. Lisa felt sick. The report wasn't just from a passenger. It had multiple statements. Passengers from first class had reported her behavior. And at the bottom of the complaint, filed directly by Idris Sinclair. Lisa's hands went cold. James's voice cut through the silence. "Let me be clear," he said, his tone unreadable. "This is not a standard review. This is a corporate-level disciplinary case." Lisa's pulse spiked. Disciplinary case. Not a warning. Not a meeting. Her stomach dropped. This was termination territory. James leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped together. "Would you like to explain your actions before we continue?" Lisa knew she had two options. 1. Defend herself. Say she was following protocol. Say it was a misunderstanding. 2. Accept responsibility. Try to salvage whatever was left. Her instinct told her to fight, to defend, to insist she had done nothing wrong. But the weight of the incident report, the passengers' statements, and Idris Sinclair's name at the bottom made her chest feel tight. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Because for the first time in her career, she knew there was no way out. Lisa sat there, her throat dry, her pulse pounding in her ears. The weight of the room pressed down on her, the polished conference table stretching between her and the executives as if it were a courtroom. And in many ways, it was. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a verdict. She glanced at the tablet screen again, her own name staring back at her, surrounded by damning words. Formal complaint. Passenger mistreatment. Escalation review. Pending disciplinary action. She had to say something. Anything. Lisa straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet James Connors's gaze. "Mr. Connors, I want to clarify that at no point did I intend to mistreat a passenger," she began, keeping her voice even. "I was managing first class the way I always do, ensuring that all passengers were where they were supposed to be, and that everything ran smoothly. If there was a misunderstanding, James raised a hand, cutting her off. "Let's start with that," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You said you were ensuring that all passengers were where they were supposed to be." He tapped the tablet, pulling up a passenger manifest. Mrs. Naima Sinclair was seated in first class with a fully paid ticket. You reviewed her boarding pass. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Lisa's stomach twisted. James didn't wait for her to respond. He swiped to another document. "This is the report from Hannah Lee, one of your own flight attendants." He glanced at the screen, reading aloud. Ms. Caldwell questioned Mrs. Sinclair's seat assignment despite clear documentation. When Mrs. Sinclair remained in her seat, Ms. Caldwell continued to act dismissively throughout the flight, neglecting standard service. Lisa clenched her jaw. She hadn't expected Hannah to write a report. James swiped again. "Then we have this," he continued, voice calm but firm. 3 first-class passengers also submitted statements. 3. He looked at her. "Do you understand how rare that is? First-class passengers usually want nothing to do with airline complaints unless they're directly inconvenienced." He leaned back slightly. But in this case, they weren't the ones being mistreated. They were the witnesses. Lisa felt the slow, crushing collapse of her defense. Her words died in her throat. James tapped the screen once more. A new report appeared, one that made Lisa's skin go ice cold. A direct letter from Idris Sinclair. Lisa stopped breathing. She didn't need to hear it read out loud. The signature at the bottom, the weight of his name, was enough. James exhaled through his nose, setting the tablet down. He folded his hands on the table, his expression unreadable. "Lisa," he said, and the use of her first name sent a fresh wave of dread through her. "I want you to be honest with me, because this isn't just about a bad day. This isn't about an overlooked drink request or a seating mix-up." His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and unyielding. "This is about why you looked at Mrs. Sinclair and assumed she didn't belong." Lisa's heart dropped. Silence stretched between them, heavy and unbearable. James leaned forward slightly. "You've worked for this airline for 10 years. Tell me something. Have you ever questioned another first-class passenger the way you questioned her?" Lisa felt like she was suffocating. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting. Her instinct was to argue, to say that it was never about that. But she couldn't, because the answer was obvious. James studied her face, waiting to see if she'd have the nerve to lie. Lisa didn't. She dropped her gaze. James sighed. "That's what I thought." Another long pause. Lisa felt herself sinking. "I'm going to be honest with you," James continued. "There's no way to spin this. You had multiple opportunities to course correct. You could have apologized the first time Mrs. Sinclair made it clear she wasn't moving. You could have treated her with the same professionalism as every other first-class passenger. But instead, he shook his head. You dug your own grave. Lisa's hands trembled under the table. James exhaled slowly. Under normal circumstances, a case like this would result in an immediate termination. Lisa's breath hitched. But, he added, tilting his head slightly, Mrs. Sinclair didn't request that. Lisa blinked, startled. She didn't? James watched her carefully. No. He tapped his fingers against the table. She didn't ask for you to be fired. She didn't demand compensation. She didn't even push for a public apology. She didn't have to. Lisa knew what that meant. Naima let the consequences happen on their own. James sighed. Here's what's going to happen. Lisa braced herself. You're suspended indefinitely, effective immediately, he said, his voice final. Pending a full corporate review. Lisa inhaled sharply. Suspended, not fired. But that didn't mean she was safe. Her record was permanently flagged. Her reputation was ruined. Even if she somehow returned, every flight attendant, every crew member, every executive would know exactly what had happened. James glanced at the other executives, then back at Lisa. You'll be contacted within the week regarding next steps. Until then, you are not permitted to enter any airline facilities or access the company's internal systems. Lisa's chest felt tight. James leaned back. Now. His tone softened slightly. Do you have anything to say? Lisa stared at the table. Her mind was a war zone. She wanted to defend herself, to say it had all been a misunderstanding, that she had never meant for any of this to happen. But she knew the truth, and so did they. Lisa swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand. James nodded, satisfied. Good. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. Lisa felt numb as she stood, her legs unsteady. Her entire career had just been ripped away from her in less than an hour, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She turned toward the door, her body moving on autopilot. As she reached for the handle, James spoke one last time. Maybe next time, he said coolly, you'll think twice before deciding who belongs. Lisa stiffened. She didn't turn around, she just stepped forward and walked out of the room, into a future she no longer recognized. Lisa walked through the hallway, her steps slow, her body moving as if she were detached from it. The reality of the meeting still clung to her like a weight she couldn't shake, suspended, indefinitely, not fired, but not protected, dangling in uncertainty. She should have felt relieved. At least she still had a chance, right? But she knew better. Her career was over. Even if she were somehow reinstated, the damage had already been done. She would never be respected again. The hallway stretched long and empty, the overhead lights casting a sterile glow. She barely noticed where she was walking, only aware of the faint murmur of conversations behind office doors, the distant sounds of suitcases rolling across the terminal floors below. She reached the exit leading to the employee parking lot, her hands trembling as she pushed it open. The blast of outside air hit her, but it didn't clear her mind. She stood there for a moment, staring out at the rows of parked cars. Her car was here, right where she had left it this morning, when she had walked into the airport confident that she was in control of everything. She had started the day believing she was untouchable. Now, she wasn't sure who she even was anymore. She forced herself to move, stepping down the sidewalk toward the far lot where employees parked. The wind whipped past her, stinging her face. Everything felt different now. The airport, the company she had worked for, the job that had been her entire identity. They weren't hers anymore. Not really. She reached her car, fumbling for her keys, her fingers cold and unsteady. She yanked the door open, slid inside, and slammed it shut, her breathing sharp and uneven. For a long moment she just sat there, silent, alone. And then, for the first time since the plane landed, for the first time since she had realized how badly she had miscalculated everything, Lisa let herself break. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, her entire body trembling as a wave of sheer, crushing humiliation washed over her. How had she let it get this far? She had built herself up to be someone untouchable, someone who knew how to stay in control, how to command respect, how to keep everything exactly as it should be. But today she had lost everything. And for what? A power play that had backfired spectacularly. Lisa squeezed her eyes shut, the memory of Naima Sinclair's face flashing in her mind. She hadn't yelled, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded an apology. She had just watched. She had let Lisa sink herself. And that was what made it all so much worse. Because Lisa had done this to herself. She wasn't suspended because someone had lied about her. She wasn't sitting in her car, on the brink of losing her entire career because of some unfair corporate decision. She was here because she had made a choice to dismiss a passenger, a choice to treat someone differently because of her own preconceived judgment, a choice that had cost her everything. Her breathing was ragged now, shallow and uneven, her body aching with the weight of it all. She didn't cry. Lisa Caldwell wasn't the kind of person who cried. But the hollow feeling in her chest was worse, because crying would have meant letting it out. This question mark, this was going to stay with her. She finally opened her eyes, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in her career, she didn't recognize herself. She looked small. She looked defeated. And most of all, she looked like someone who had finally learned what it meant to be powerless. Lisa inhaled deeply, forcing her hands to stop shaking as she gripped the wheel tighter. She had no idea what would happen next. Would the airline cut her loose? Would another company ever hire her again? She didn't know. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This was the day everything changed, and there was no going back. Lisa sat in the stillness of her car, the only sound coming from the distant hum of airplanes taking off and landing. The airport she had once ruled over, the place where she had walked with confidence and authority, now felt like it had rejected her completely. She was nothing here anymore. The silence inside the car was unbearable. It wasn't the comforting kind of silence, the type that allowed for deep breaths and clear thoughts. It was the kind that pressed down on her, forcing her to confront the undeniable truth. She had ruined herself. She had spent years believing she was above these kinds of consequences, that she knew how to handle people, how to put them in their place without leaving a trace of fault on her record. But today, there had been no hiding what she had done, no covering it up, no spinning it into a misunderstanding. Everyone had seen her for exactly what she was, and worst of all, so had she. Her fingers hovered over her phone, her mind desperate for a way out. Maybe she could talk to someone at corporate. Maybe she could convince them that she had been misunderstood. Maybe, just maybe, she could argue that she wasn't like that. But what would she even say? That she had made a mistake? That it hadn't been about anything other than standard protocol? She could barely convince herself of that anymore. Lisa gritted her teeth, tossing her phone onto the passenger seat with a shaky exhale. She thought about the moment it all started. Naima Sinclair, sitting in that first-class seat, belonging there. The irritation Lisa had felt, the immediate urge to challenge her, to make her feel out of place. She had felt justified at the time, and now all she could feel was the slow, creeping understanding of how ugly it had really been. The knock on her car window made her flinch. Lisa turned her head sharply, her heart leaping into her throat. For a split second she thought it was security, or maybe someone from corporate. Maybe they had changed their minds. Maybe they were here to tell her it was over, really over. But when she saw who it was, her breath caught in her chest. Naima Sinclair. Lisa's entire body tensed. Naima stood outside the car, calm as ever, her blazer still perfectly in place, her posture straight and confident. Exactly as she had been the entire flight. Lisa hesitated, unsure whether to roll the window down or pretend she hadn't seen her. But what was the point? Naima already knew she had seen her. Lisa swallowed hard, and with shaky fingers reached for the window control, lowering it just enough. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Lisa wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe gloating. Maybe some final remark to twist the knife in deeper. But when Naima finally spoke, her voice was quiet, even, controlled. "You thought I didn't belong there." Lisa's breath caught. She couldn't answer. Naima studied her for a moment, then glanced at the airport behind them, the place Lisa had called hers for so long. "I didn't have to say anything," Naima continued, "because I knew you would say everything for me." Lisa's jaw tightened, her fingers digging into her lap. "I wasn't the one who made this happen," Naima said, tilting her head slightly. "You did." The words landed like a punch. Lisa had spent all day thinking about what had happened to her. She hadn't stopped to think about what she had done. For a moment she wanted to argue, wanted to throw out the excuses still clawing at the back of her mind. "I was just following protocol. I didn't mean anything by it. I treat everyone the same." But she didn't say any of that, because she knew it wasn't true. Naima didn't look angry, she didn't look vengeful. She just looked like someone who had already moved past this moment. And that was what made it hurt the most. Lisa had lost everything over this. And to Naima, it was just another Tuesday. Naima gave her one last look before taking a step back from the car. "I hope you sit with this," she said simply. "Really sit with it." Lisa swallowed. her throat thick and dry. Then, without another word, Naima turned and walked toward the waiting black car parked near the curb. The driver stepped out, opened the door for her, and she slid in smoothly. Lisa stared. Her chest felt tight, her vision blurring at the edges. Because Naima was right, Lisa was going to sit with this for a very, very long time. Lisa sat in her car, completely still, as she watched Naima's black car pull away from the curb and disappear into the steady flow of airport traffic. She should have looked away, should have started her own engine and left, should have moved on, just as Naima had. Because that was the real punishment, wasn't it? Naima wasn't stuck here. Naima wasn't the one questioning everything about herself, wasn't the one staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering how she had gotten here. But Lisa was. Lisa was stuck. She reached for her phone, her fingers hesitant as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed to call someone, anyone, who could help her think, help her make sense of what had just happened, someone who could tell her what to do next. Her finger hovered over a name, Kendra Wallace, her friend, her co-worker, a senior flight attendant who had been with the airline almost as long as she had. If anyone would listen, it would be her. Lisa hesitated, then pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then, "Kendra Wallace is unavailable. Leave a message after the tone." The automatic voice hit her like a brick. She pulled the phone away, staring at the screen for a second before pressing end call. Her stomach twisted. Kendra had always answered her calls. Always. Was she avoiding her? Had she already heard? Lisa's fingers tightened around the phone. Maybe Kendra wasn't ignoring her. Maybe she was just busy. Maybe it was nothing. But the thought kept nagging at her. Lisa's name had already been dragged through corporate. The executives knew. Security knew. How many others had already heard? She scrolled again, this time landing on her supervisor's name. Rachel Morris. The person who had fought for her promotion. The one who had trusted her to handle first-class operations without supervision. Lisa stared at the name for a long time, debating whether to call. Would Rachel answer? Would she even want to? Lisa's thumb hovered over the button. Then, at the last second, she shut off her screen and dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. What was she even going to say? That she was sorry. She wasn't even sure she was. Not because she didn't regret it, she did. But because she had spent so many years believing she was right. Believing that her way of doing things was the best way. And now, in the span of one flight, she had been forced to face something she had never wanted to admit. She had never been as untouchable as she thought. She gritted her teeth, her hands tightening around the steering wheel. What now? Did she wait out the suspension? Hope for a miracle? Did she start looking for other jobs? Could she even get another job after this? What airline would hire someone who had been suspended by a CEO's direct order? Lisa pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, her breathing shallow. This wasn't just a setback. This was the end of the life she had built. She had spent 10 years crafting her reputation, making sure she had control, making sure that everyone in first class knew who was in charge. And now, she had no control over anything, and everyone knew it. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the flood of thoughts, but they wouldn't stop. What if they never reinstated her? What if she was blacklisted from the industry? What if she had to start over from nothing? Lisa's breath came out unsteady. For the first time since stepping onto that plane, she was forced to accept a truth she had never been ready for. She had always been the one with power, and now she knew exactly what it felt like to have it stripped away. This wasn't just about a mistake. This wasn't just about one flight. This was about who she was, or rather, who she had been. Lisa didn't know what came next. For the first time in years, she didn't have a plan. No quick fix, no strategy. Just the cold, hollow realization that everything she thought she knew about herself had shattered. And this time, there was no one else to blame. Lisa inhaled sharply, gripping the wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Then, slowly, she turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, but she didn't drive. She just sat there, staring at the road ahead. But for the first time in her life, Lisa had no idea where she was going. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think should have happened to Lisa? Let us know. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.